Life Audio.
Thank you for listening to the Crosswalk Devotional. We are so glad to have you listening with us. Today's topic is inner transformation. After a brief message from one of our sponsors, we will continue with today's devotion.
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than just money. We help you put your plans into motion and faith into action so you can do more for the ones in your heart. Because sometimes all you need to make a difference is someone to help you make it happen. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
Did you know that the Salvation Army produces podcasts in both English and Spanish? One of those shows, Heartbeat, is a 1-minute show about real life. This show comes out twice a week and touches on topics that affect everyday Christians, from finances and prayer life to dating, marriage, and mental health. Here's a clip from our latest episode.
The list goes on and on. It can be challenging to take a break from all the noise. And when you do stop, you get anxious, worrying you're going to miss something. What would your day look like if you intentionally took a break and unplugged? Instead of endless scrolling on your phone or tablet, you put it down and you take the time to settle into the peace of God's presence. Share what's on your heart and listen for what's on His. You may be surprised in what you hear.
Listen to the Salvation Army's Heartbeat wherever you get your podcasts or visit salvationarmysoundcast.org.
When Jesus Changes Lives, written and read by Kyle Norman. Acts chapter 9, verse 20 says, "Immediately, Saul began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God." We often use the language of, quote, having faith. But that makes it seem like faith is a possession that we hold. Or maybe faith is a tool that we keep in our spiritual utility belts, only to be used when we need to solve some spiritual problem. But faith, biblically, is a verb. It's an action. It's a way of life. This is why the followers of Jesus were initially called followers of the way. Meeting the risen Jesus naturally changes us. Jesus changes our habits, our behaviors, our attitudes, and the very way in which we live. Here's the thing, Scripture continually tells the same story. When people meet the risen Jesus, people meet the Lord who changes their life. There are many examples of this. Take Saul, for example. Acts chapter 9 begins by stating that Saul was breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. But if you just jump 20 verses later, we hear that he is in the synagogue proclaiming that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah. Well, that's quite the change, isn't it? Those two bookended verses, they highlight that something big must have happened to change this man so dramatically. And of course there was. Saul had an encounter with the risen Jesus. The same thing happens to Ananias. As Saul is praying and fasting on Straight Street, trying to make sense of his experience on the Damascus Road, the Lord appears to Ananias. Jesus calls him to go to Saul and pray for him. But Ananias initially expresses some hesitation. He's heard of Saul. He knows his reputation. And so he responds to the Lord, questioning if this is really the person that he was to go see. But Jesus calls Ananias to step out in bold faith and to witness and pray for someone that he never thought he would. And then, of course, there's Peter. Who can forget Peter, the lovable, somewhat dim-witted Peter? Not only does Peter deny knowing Jesus, not once, but 3 times, he does this immediately after he tells Jesus, "I will never do that." And not only does he deny his Lord, but he curses himself while doing so. And yet, when he meets the risen Lord, affirming his love for him, Peter is called to a new life of ministry and leadership. All of these people have their lives changed because they meet the risen Jesus. Jesus calls them to embrace a different way of life. Saul to accepting the risen Jesus, preaching what he once denied. Ananias to reach out to someone he never thought that he would. And Peter to become a head of this ragtag movement called Followers of the Way. In each person, in ways unique to what Jesus wanted to do in them and through them, Jesus works a transformation. So if Jesus changed the lives of all these people, don't you think that he might come to us and change our lives too? Intersecting faith and life. Isn't it great that there is nobody who ever works their way out of the graceful acceptance of Jesus? There is no one who is deemed unworthy. There is no one for whom Jesus will not come and meet in his grace. At times, it might be tempting to think that Jesus doesn't want to work in us or work through us. We may even fear that a sin or some insufficiency in our life might cause Jesus to refuse us. But let's be honest. If Jesus would refuse anybody, wouldn't he refuse the person who was breathing murderous threats against his followers? Or if not Saul, surely it would be Peter, right? If there was anybody who would have done something to remove themselves from the blessing of Jesus, it was the one who denied him so boldly. But if Jesus does not reject Saul, or Peter, or any of the disciples that turned and ran away from him, why would Jesus ever refuse us? Where do you think that Jesus wants to work a transformation in your life? What might Jesus want to address? Like Saul, is there an action that Jesus might want you to move away from? Is there a new direction that Jesus wants you to pursue? Or like Ananias, is there a person that Jesus wants you to embrace? Maybe you feel more like Peter. If so, is there a sin that Jesus wants to cover in his love? Meeting the risen Jesus means meeting the one who transforms our lives. In every case, in every way, Jesus comes and calls us to embrace new life. But we must embrace the voice of Jesus. We must be open to him and follow him. So how might you embrace the change that Jesus wants to make in you? True, it might involve a process, an about-face, and maybe a time of prayer and wrestling. But on the other end is a life lived in the grace, forgiveness, and power of the living God.
The Crosswalk Devotional is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review this podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.
Finding uplifting news in today's headlines is often like searching for a needle in a haystack. At the Story Behind podcast, we believe in the power of finding heartwarming tales and are happy to share empowering stories with you every week. Get inspired by the note a waitress received from a patron dining alone, and even hear about how one VIP passenger made a hardworking pilot get emotional before his flight. To start listening to the Story Behind podcast, visit lifeaudio.com